Hello and welcome to another Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow. And in this episode, we're joined by Geoff Taylor, CEO of the BPI, the British Recorded Music Industries Trade Association, which represents the interests of its members, who include all the major UK labels and hundreds of indie labels and music businesses, and also runs the Brit and Mercury Awards. This is the first interview Geoff has given since announcing he will step down from his role at the BPI in 2023. Now, what is the Music Ally Focus podcast? Well, just like Music Ally, it provides an analysis-rich and expert contextual guide to the music business, and we analyse one meaningful music story at a time. This episode is the first in a new ongoing series celebrating Music Ally's upcoming 20th anniversary, and will feature interviews with people who've had a significant impact on the music industry during those last 2 decades. That's people like Geoff, who has led the BPI for 15 years, a period which has seen significant technological, economic and structural change. So we wanted to talk to him about the changes he's seen in that time, the work he and the BPI has done in the music tech sector, and where it's all going next in the UK's recorded music industry. But we started by asking him about two of the biggest issues he's faced: the recent UK parliamentary inquiry into the economics of music streaming and the very recent decision by the UK's CMA, that's the Competition and Markets Authority, not to conduct a full market investigation into music streaming and the UK's music industry. All right, let's go over to Geoff now. So we're very happy to be joined by Geoff Taylor, CEO of the BPI. Hi, Geoff.
Hey, Joe. Good to see you.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us. Rather, I should say, outgoing CEO of the BPI. Geoff is moving on in 2023 after 15 years at the helm, and that gives us a bit of an opportunity to look both backwards over your tenure and forward to the future. But first, Geoff, let's have a look at the present and what's been happening in recent years. We've had a heated couple of years examination of the UK's recorded music industry, particularly around streaming and income. And it feels like we've really shone a lot of light onto that area. So a couple of weeks ago, we had an announcement from the Competition and Market Authority, and they decided not to conduct a full market investigation into music streaming and the UK's music industry. So, Geoff, with a couple of weeks of reflection, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I suppose at a top level, Joe, the interim conclusions didn't enormously surprise us. It's always been our view that the streaming market is characterized by a high level of competition. You see a lot of competition between the different digital music services, all competing for users. You see a lot of competition between labels to have the best deals with those music streaming services. A lot of competition, obviously, between all the artists who are trying to, succeed and get as much attention on those services. And, fans doing really well out of that because they're getting an incredible deal, prices that haven't risen in sort of 15 years, and more and more music available to them at the touch of a button. So we weren't surprised at a top line that those were the sort of some highlights that the CMA found. Obviously, we recognize this is just an interim market update. There'll be a further consultation. We're not taking any of this as final. But we were pleased to see some acknowledgements of some key characteristics of streaming, which we felt have perhaps been undervalued in the debate so far. There's been a lot of emotion. There's been a lot of anecdote. And, it was good to have a dispassionate, objective regulator look at it and perhaps find some facts that might help us to narrow the issues in the conversation going forward.
Now, understandably, not everyone is happy with this decision. Like you say, it's been a highly passionate debate. And it's understandable because what it comes down to is, like you say, there's a lot of people who are getting something very important out of it. Fans are getting something they love out of it. And artists, for instance, are looking for income from something that they put a lot of time and passion into. For example, on the other side, Ivors Academy chair and Broken Record founder, Tom Gray, said he felt it fails to address the urgent need to fully and properly value the song within streaming. That's a quote from him. And other people, Musicians Union General Secretary Naomi Pohl reacted with disappointment. There's still some way to go with this report, as you said. Do you agree that as a result of all this, though, that the last couple of years, this announcement from the CMA, that it means there's some sort of gradual change that's going to happen in the UK's music industry as a result of these conversations? What sort of improvements might be made?
Well, I think it's worth spending a bit of time on this, Joe, if we can, because there have been a lot of issues raised in the context of this streaming inquiry and the CMA study and the wider social media debate around these issues. And so I'm going to come on in a moment to where I think we can make progress together and all those questions. But before doing so, I think it's worth spending another minute on the CMA's conclusions or interim conclusions, because I think this industry, I've been in it for a while, when there's growth, there tends to be a bit of a paroxysm of fighting over shares of the pie. And it happened when the downloads business started. There was a debate over publishing royalties on downloads. This happened again with streaming. And there can be a huge cost to that. We're all, we're fighting amongst ourselves. And it means that we're unable to focus on some of the perhaps bigger issues that could really help. So some of the findings that we felt were most significant in the CMA's interim update were that, firstly, artists are not faced, despite what's been said, with take it or leave it terms from labels. In fact, royalty rates for artists have gone up significantly. They have a wider choice than they've ever had in terms of the types of deals that they strike and the duration of those deals. So, featured artists are benefiting from streaming with improved terms. Secondly, there was this suggestion that somehow songwriters' royalties have been suppressed by the cross-ownership of recorded music divisions being together with publishing. And the CMA found there's no evidence for that at all. In fact, the evidence points in the opposite direction, because songwriters have seen the biggest increase in their share of the pie since streaming came along. And thirdly, there's no evidence for the assertion that record companies are making excessive profits. In fact, if you look at their profits compared to the cost of capital, they're in the normal range. And actually, that's because labels are spending a lot of their revenues on investment. We touched just before we came on the announcement that we made about A&R investment yesterday. Maybe we'll speak about that later. But labels are investing very heavily in data management, but also in A&R and marketing, etc. And so there are new costs that are substituted for the old costs of physical distribution. As a result, labels are not making excessive profits, rather they're investing their revenues as they should be. So those were really significant findings, because I think they cause one to reflect on this assumption that there's perhaps been in some of the debate that labels are the cause of all the problems artists are having with streaming. And in fact, the CMA comes to a different conclusion. The CMA comes to the conclusion that it is really the hyper-competitiveness of the market that has caused the challenges that artists face. So with a relatively fixed income of subscription monies coming into the streaming business, and then an increasing number of artists fighting for a share of those revenues and limited, finite consumer time to listen, those factors inevitably depress the per stream rate that not just artists receive, but that labels receive. And this is why I passionately believe that actually labels are the best partners for artists in helping to raise the value of streaming. Because ultimately what we need to do is get more money into the music industry from digital platforms. And that's something we can touch on a bit later. And when I talked about the opportunity costs of having this debate, there are things that we should be doing that would increase the value of streaming for the benefit of everyone. And I believe actually labels are best placed to help artists achieve that.
That's an interesting point you've made there, which is the per stream rate is going down because of these market factors. You mentioned at the beginning that, for instance, music fans are getting value for money because the prices haven't gone up for streaming for a long time. People who are, let's say, complaining about their income from music, from streaming, they're going to be faced with the same pressures as everybody in the next 6 months to a year as things are going to get financially difficult. We can talk about this in a minute, but what is the solution there then? If more money needs to come in, what is the solution?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that we need to continue to grow the streaming market. And the way that labels help artists achieve that is by firstly trying to strike the best deals that they can with the streaming companies to maximize the revenue, because the labels share a proportion of their revenue with their featured artists. So the bigger the revenue is, the more featured artists will receive. The interests of the label and the artist are 100% aligned in that regard. But secondly, labels strike deals with the new services that bring new money in to the music economy. So it's not just about trying to get as much as you can out of Spotify and YouTube. It's also about who are the new services, Peloton, TikTok, etc., that you can license to bring new money in. And one of the most important jobs that labels do for artists is find those partners and strike those new deals to bring more money into the music economy. So that's why I say when I think that labels are the most important partners to artists in increasing the value of streaming, that's how it is done. And when I've referred to the opportunity costs of the streaming debate, we haven't spent the time we should have spent looking at, our relationship with companies like TikTok. Are they paying what they should be paying for music? Are there new uses of music which we could monetize? And, the whole debate around sort of user uploaded content, a lot of that was focused on YouTube. If you go back, 2-3 years when it was really at its height. But actually there are new services that are using music that are either unlicensed or not completely licensed, where arguably they're not paying what they should to the music community. And that should be a big focus of ours. And we're not spending, in my view, as much time as we should on those issues because we've been so focused on our internal streaming debate.
One of the things that artists have been asking for is transparency. One thing it did suggest was that labels could give artists more information on streaming and how their earnings are calculated. Do you think we're heading into an era of increased transparency between labels and artists? Because this is something they're calling for.
Yes, I do. And transparency is first among those. So, labels already work really hard in a very data-rich, complex environment to give the right amount of data to artists. And they've, all the major labels have these really complex royalty portals that artists and managers can sign on to that will show you each service and how much each stream is paying by territory, by service, etc. Sometimes too much information is actually a problem. So balancing that and getting it right is something they're all trying to do. But there is a high degree of transparency from them. I think those are good practices that we need to see spread around the industry. There's obviously a significant cost of doing that. So we're working under the supervision of the government and the IPO on a kind of code of good practices on transparency. And I'm really hopeful that we will get to that. And that will be one of the outputs from all this work. My view would be that actually broken records and fixed streaming, etc., they deserve credit for the amount of focus that they've managed to get on these issues. And there will be, I think, some really positive outcomes from that. So, better practices on transparency will be valuable and will increase trust in the industry and will ensure that the industry works better together. The second area is metadata, where, it seems more of a challenge on the publishing side than on the recorded music side of the industry. But there's no doubt that the metadata, the flow of ISWCs and songwriter identifiers isn't as good as it could be. So if we can work to improve that, make sure that the right identifiers travel with the music wherever possible, then songwriters will get paid more quickly and more accurately. And that's in everybody's interest. So labels want to help with that. And they've also, I think, the debate and broken record, etc., led to changes in the recoupment policies that major labels applied to their pre-2000 deals. And that's very significant. That means that thousands of artists are now receiving streaming royalties that previously didn't because they were unrecouped. So I think a lot of progress has already been made. I mentioned in a blog I did recently that we think one area that still requires attention is the position of session musicians. Session musicians haven't really benefited. Songwriters benefit from better metadata. Featured artists benefit from the recoupment changes and the transparency code. The session musicians haven't seen the terms improve to the same degree as featured artists and songwriters. So we want to do something there. We are talking to the Musicians Union about updating the BPI MU deal to try and make sure that session musicians share fairly in the growth from streaming. So, I think all of this focus and controversy is going to lead to some really good outcomes, and we're working really hard to secure that.
Yeah, like you say, open dialogue is good, and healthy debate is good. It's definitely, it's given us a lot to write about at Music Ally in the last 2 years, but it's all been essentially bringing things to the surface in a good way. It's been a passionate conversation. You mentioned Tom Gray there and the Broken Record campaign. How has this left the relationship between the labels and the artists? Would you still have a beer with Tom Gray now? You move in similar circles, or would you be hurling insults or worse across the room with each other?
No. Tom and I had breakfast not that long ago, actually, and he's great to spend time with. And the same is true, Crispin Hunt also has been, very, I would say, outspoken on these issues. Sometimes I would say that he's perhaps let his invective and rhetoric go further than the facts would fully justify, but he might not agree with that. Nonetheless, at a personal level, we get on really well. I do see him from time to time, and we have a very healthy exchange of views. We had lunch down at the Great Escape, which was very lovely on the beach there, and set the world to rights. So, I think there's still good dialogue going on. Of course, we don't agree on everything, but we are, as I said, making progress towards, I think, some outcomes which could be positive for everyone, which I really like to see. I think we hope that the CMA can at least help to narrow down the number of issues that we're debating and allow perhaps more of a focus on those areas you've just mentioned there, Joe, on transparency, on metadata, etc., so that we can develop some positive outcomes and perhaps start to draw a line under some of this debate and move on to some of the other issues that I've touched on.
I mean, we will see. We will see what happens in the future. But whatever happens, you won't be heading up the BPI. You've made a recent announcement that you'll be moving on in 2023. It'd be a good opportunity then to look back at the last 15 years while you've been at the BPI. And
that part of it I can remember anyway, Joe. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Well, if you can remember it, you weren't there. So with that in mind, I'd have a little bit of a look at technology as part of a focus on this, because one of the key developments over the last 15 years is clearly how the music industry has become a tech industry, and that part of the tech industry has become the music industry. It's all morphed together. There's been a lot of new technology implemented under your leadership, including, for instance, technology at the ISP and search engine level, combating piracy, things like that. If you look back over 15 years, how has the relationship between tech companies and music companies changed?
I think the biggest change is that we've seen more tech companies begin to appreciate the value of music and the fact that it needs to be treated with respect, that those who create music need to be treated with respect. Now, we would still say not enough, but if you go back 10 or 15 years, the battles were with the Pirate Bay, with kick-ass torrents, with peer-to-peer networks, etc. And it was, the legal consumption of music had almost become a ghetto, a minority part of overall consumption. And the battle over the last 15 years has been to ensure that consumers access music legally, that the fruits of that are shared with the creative community fairly. And I think enormous progress has been made on that. Technology will always be used for whatever it can do. That doesn't always make it right. And I think we had a battle of hearts and minds to win, that actually, rights in music, copyright matter, that they should be enforced, not consigned to the dustbin, and that actually artists, songwriters, labels, publishers all deserve to be paid for what they do. So, we did that in lots of ways. We had to use legal tools, we had to use technology, and on the tech side, which is where we came in on this question, I'm proud that we really ramped up our delisting activities. So we scaled that to be the biggest remover of content from Google and Bing, and I forget what it is now. We're well over 1 billion infringing search results that we've removed now from the search engines. And obviously, we brought a big legal campaign to block access to sites like the Pirate Bay and kick-ass torrents, and to try and marginalize the use of technology for piracy. And at the same time, the industry was obviously beginning to license new services. So I mentioned before that at the beginning, services which really valued content were perhaps in the minority, and Steve Jobs was so influential in his view that music should be paid for. That was quite unusual coming from a tech company back then. But as we've seen the market develop and more download services launch, and then the onset of streaming, Spotify was based on almost the convergence of these issues, using peer-to-peer technology to enable a much more efficient distribution of music to millions of people around the world at a lower cost than before, but on a licensed basis, and not having pirate content on their service. And so I think we have seen more tech companies embrace the idea that creative content needs to be paid for, and that the licensing that happens between a music company and a tech company creates something of increased value to both. And so we've seen a lot of progress, but there are still risks, and there's still more for us to do. You know, I was very pleased that over the last few years, we managed to negotiate new policies from social media companies like Facebook and YouTube. So Facebook now blocks access to all the major pirate sites so that if you try and post about them, it's automatically removed. YouTube removes tutorial videos that talk about how to pirate, how to stream rip, etc. So, you know, you have to continue to sort of make new progress with the tech companies, because if we rely on a reactive approach to piracy of just, we have to go out and find each infringing file, we have to send a notice to take it down, we will never solve the problem. The BPI's whole strategy has been based on trying to transfer responsibility to the tech companies, to take proactive responsibility for removing pirate content from their services themselves, and to lead consumers towards legal content. And I think, you know, we've made a lot of progress in that, but there will always be new challenges. We see the government potentially introducing a new exception for text and data mining that could allow the use of artificial intelligence to use music without paying for it, which we should spend more time on because it's a serious threat and a major problem that the government would even advance such a policy. And you also see the development of the metaverse, Web3, new environments which will have new forms of piracy. And so I think it'll still be a big part of the BPI's agenda to protect the value of music, to make sure that artists are getting paid when their music is consumed.
One of the big changes that we're looking at going forwards now, you mentioned the metaverse there and new platforms, is that music is shifting from this kind of simple distribution and consumption model, which perhaps we have now, into sort of ways where the end user is also a creator. They can, you know, they're building three-dimensional spaces in Roblox, and they want to plug in a piece of music to use to make this experience or something like that. That's just one example, but there's lots of ways as we look forwards. Of you talk about the value of licensing there and getting people to appreciate the value of music through those licenses. There's a lot of perhaps fragmentation, isn't there, in the way that music is going to be consumed. And how do you, we're looking forward a little bit now, how do you sort of feel about that sort of forward landscape of where perhaps the simple form of licensing, which is, okay, we license this to you and you provide that music to them, becomes just one of the options, where it could be, in the future, you could be saying, okay, we license this piece of music to you, and then you allow this to be embedded in a metaverse experience. It could be in a TikTok. It could be, you know, in 100 different ways.
Yeah.
How do you foresee that going?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest next challenges for the music industry. You know, we haven't yet figured out how are we going to create a legal ecosystem around these new sorts of use. So, you know, we are licensing, for example, the Brits last year, we licensed, performance by Pink Pantheress on Roblox, and we created a Brits world on Roblox. And that was fantastic for bringing, you know, much younger fans in, more from a gaming background, etc., to engage with the Brits and to learn about Pink Pantheress and do some other artist meet and greets and things. But at the moment, it's not that scalable. So, you know, one has to set up each project individually. What we have to do is to develop an ecosystem for all these, a kind of licensing ecosystem for these new uses that allows uses to be licensed, tracked, royalties to be reported, piracy to be discovered and rooted out at scale. You know, we need to be putting a lot more attention into that because it's hard to keep up with tech developments. There are always new services coming along. And that's where I say one of the biggest services that labels provide to artists is helping them navigate this new environment, striking the deals that mean that music, when it is inevitably used in those environments, is monetized and the artists are rewarded for that use.
Okay, and just to jump in here, if you're finding this useful and you'd like more of this in-depth news and trusted analysis waiting for you in your inbox every morning, as well as access to all of our industry-leading reports, head on over to musically.com/subscribe. And you, yes, you may be eligible for a free Music Ally subscription via our corporate and sponsored subscriptions. So if you work for a DSP, a major label, an indie label, or if you're an artist manager, an employee of a CMO or a publisher, you can check to see if it's available for you. It's musically.com/subscription-options. There's a link below the podcast to check out as well. Okay, let's go back to the interview. You engaged quite early with the concept of AI music. That is music that is generated by computer programs. And you sort of were dealing with what effect it may have. It's a complicated area because you mentioned just a minute ago about who gets paid in those situations. What kind of data sets of music are you training AIs on? There's some very big ethical questions there, and also big licensing and payment questions and ownership questions. We've gone a long way past the sort of basic understanding of AI music and would it steal jobs from musicians, and we're fairly sure that may not be the case at a basic level, but there's still big questions around ownership and payment. And what are your feelings now on AI created music?
The first is, of course, AI is a new technology that can be used very creatively in a very positive way. And so the industry cannot fall into the trap of new technology, we're scared, we must oppose it in every form. Now, artists are already using AI in the studio, to select samples. There are tools that allow you to create bass lines. There are, creative tools using AI, which will be of use. But I think when we look at the use of AI in music, we need to divide it up into, firstly, input. Well, I guess we'd say inputs and outputs. So in terms of the inputs, how should music be used by an AI? And it is our very strong view that if someone wants to use an AI to train their AI using recorded music, then they should require a license to do that. So if someone wants to use, either, let's say, all the Adele recordings or all the chart hits since the 1970s to analyze that data set and to produce something new using that data, then they should absolutely require permission to do that. And that should be a licensable act. And the fact that the government has proposed, as I mentioned a minute ago, that it may introduce a new exception for text and data mining, which would cover all uses, including commercial uses. That would essentially mean that anyone can train their AI on any music that's ever been made without seeking permission from anybody involved in the creation of that music. That is wrong in so many ways. Firstly, it's morally wrong to allow someone to take, something of genius that was created by a third party and use it without paying for it. But secondly, we think it's very bad policy, because as the development of the streaming economy shows, actually when you allow the market to operate and licensing to happen, that creates new value, both for the creative industries and for the technology sector working together. And to create a new exception that means that no licenses are required is a sort of disavowal of the fundamental principle underlying copyright, which is that, you should ask permission to use something that someone else has created and pay for it. So we're very concerned that the government has indicated that that's its direction of travel, as are the whole creative industries. And this is an example of one of the massive issues that we need to be spending our time working on, other than the issues that we have been concentrated on. So that's all about the inputs. In terms of the outputs of AI, there is a question: how much copyright protection should be given to new creations that are made by a computer program or by an AI? And I think more thought needs to be given to that. On the one hand, of course, using these tools to create new music could be creative. On the other hand, what will it do for the incentives of human creators? If you're already competing against 70 million tracks on Spotify, and if hundreds of millions or billions more are artificially created by an AI, and all human creators then have to compete with those, and playlists are stuffed full of them and people don't even realize, is that a good outcome for human creativity? And ultimately, certainly for the time being, most of the investment of record labels goes into human creativity. And we need to make sure the incentives are still there for people to spend their time creating art.
I mean, from a user's perspective, if you said to me, for instance, we've trained an AI on the catalogue of the Beatles and it's been working for a year and we've created one new song that sounds just like the Beatles and has all the magic excitement of the Beatles, and here it is. I think as a consumer, I'd be very happy about that because, wow, fantastic. People would do anything for a new Beatles song, right? Of the quality of what they're used to. So is there a similarity here between, for instance, the desire of the marketplace to get new good stuff, and perhaps looking back to, you mentioned piracy earlier, people were presented with the opportunity of free and they lapped it up because you take the music you want for free. So,
but ultimately the opportunity of free in piracy was going to become unsustainable, because if no one paid for music, then talented people would not spend their time creating music. And so I think with AI, what we're asking for is, if there is a licensing framework in place, you can make sure the economic incentives are in the right place. But if then, the people who now, Apple Music and those who represent Apple Records, who represent the Beatles music, if they want to license a particular use and they approve it creatively and they approve it from a financial standpoint, then, fine, it gets licensed, that's great. But the idea that you take away that licensing process is what concerns us the most. And we think that puts all the incentives in the wrong place.
So there is an opportunity to have your cake and eat it. We can get those new songs and people hopefully can get paid for it as well.
Exactly right. I mean, there is a long track record of the industry licensing new technologies for creative uses, but that has to happen on a basis that some value will flow back into the music industry. Otherwise, it becomes unsustainable.
The BPI has just released a set of very positive data about the UK record label investment into talent and new music. This is obviously something you feel very positive about, and is a reflection of the state of recorded music in the recorded music industry in the UK at the moment. So what have you seen change in the last decade or so that has resulted in a position where these very big numbers are being reported as being invested into new music?
Well, ultimately, this is a sign of the gradual recovery of the industry from the effects of piracy. We are not yet back. It's very important to remember we're still a long way down in real terms, in inflation-adjusted terms, as the CMA found, from where we were in the early 2000s. But we have made a lot of progress from where we were, 10 years ago. And that allows record companies to earn revenues that they can reinvest. I talked earlier about how they're having to reinvest some of that money into data management tools because of the complexity of the streaming economy. But more of it is going into new artist investment, into releasing and marketing new music. So the fact that UK labels are now spending nearly £500 million a year on A&R and on marketing is tremendous. And the biggest increase there is a doubling of A&R investment year on year, which is fantastic, because that means that we're going to see more good quality music released, which is great for fans, will engage them more in the streaming services, will help the growth of the streaming economy in terms of new subscribers, etc. So the consumer wins, the tech companies win, hopefully the labels win and the artists win, because there's greater investment going into the artist community and more and better music. So we see it as a very positive sign for the future. In a time when we face a much stricter global competition than we ever have. So if we're going to compete successfully against artists, K-pop, J-pop, from Latin America, obviously from the United States and North America generally, we have to double down and invest more in the creation of new music in this country. So that is a very positive sign. What I don't see yet is the government coming to the party and backing the music industry in the same way as it backs the film industry, the TV industry, and the games industry in this country. And I think, one of the areas that we need to put a lot more time into once we hopefully are able to deal with some of the streaming issues is making the case for government that there should be the kind of tax incentives for music that exist for film and TV and games. There should be this sort of support in terms of grants for regional firms around this country for SMEs, for local labels in other parts of the country to grow their businesses, the government has given to those other sectors, and that there should be the support for the independent labels and independent artists to export their music at a much higher level than currently exists through the Make scheme. The Make scheme is fantastic, but there is not nearly enough investment going into it to produce the scale of return that we need if we're going to be competitive. So I think there is an agenda here for the future, for the BPI, the UK music, for the whole of the music industry, which is all about positive growth of the sector as a whole, and we need to get on with it.
You mentioned a minute ago that one of the challenges for the future was around licensing and new technologies. As you look ahead then, before you make your final bow at the BPI, what are the other sort of big challenges, perhaps, that are on the horizon for the industry and for perhaps the next CEO of the BPI?
I think I've mentioned a lot of the policy issues. So I would consider them to be looking at the new services, the new user upload services like TikTok. Is the framework right for the licensing of those services? Are we making sure that uses are properly monetized? There are kind of value gap questions to be looked at in respect to those new services. Secondly, greater export support. Thirdly, fiscal incentive for the music industry, as there is for film and TV, to encourage more capital to be invested in the creation of new content in the UK. That'd be good not just for labels and the recorded music sector, but recording studios in the UK and getting more sessions here, so it'll ripple out more widely. But I'd say, in addition to, and I mentioned the AI issue, in addition to all those policy issues, I'd say the next head of the BPI, another big part of their job is what it says on the tin about the BPI, which is promoting British music. I think we've hopefully helped to strengthen the Brit Awards and particularly its digital reach, and we brought in the Mercury Prize. But we also need to think about other genres. I'd love to see the classic Brits brought back. That's something we'd like to do, perhaps not annually, but certainly every 2 or 3 years. We've been working with the Mobo Awards to give them some assistance, on sort of commercial work and bring in sponsorship and that kind of thing, because we want to see the Mobo Awards flourish. We've supported the Gramophone Awards. And our ambition at the BPI is to promote all the different genres of British music. And so what can we do for folk? What can we do for classical? What can we do for rap, hip hop? What can we do for all the different areas of British music to ensure that it prospers? And so I think, there's an opportunity to build on what we've done over the last few years and take that to the next level.
So with that in mind, then, you look at the talent pipeline that's coming through in the UK at the moment. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the Mercury's shortlist at the moment, I think that shows you that British music is in really great health. One of the things we do at the BPI, which is very important to us, is to try and promote the diversity of the future talent pipeline. Diversity is a big issue across the industry. I think the UK Music Diversity Surveys, out there at the moment, we're trying to push it out to all our members, get the best data we can on diversity across the industry. But obviously, it's also very important in terms of artist representation. So the Mercury's list is very diverse, as it has been for the last few years, and that's a focus of ours. You may remember some years ago, we did a huge piece of work under Jed Doherty to reform the Brits Academy, make sure that the Brits Academy properly reflects the UK society, but also the music industry as a whole, and make sure, therefore, that the Brits nominations and winners are diverse as they should be. And right across the industry, this is a truly important piece of work. So we've tried to bring in better representation around the BPI Council table. I introduced a new program funded through our charity, the Brit Trust, so many thanks to them, of the Brits Apprenticeship Program, the purpose of which was to help more young people from diverse backgrounds come into the industry and get their first experience of working in the industry on a paid basis with training. But we're also going an earlier stage, and the BPI has always been super committed to music education. So it's been a privilege for me to be a governor at the Brit School. I was founder governor at Elam in East London, and we're working hard to try and see if we can set up a Brit School in the north, because we want to see young people from all around the country and from diverse backgrounds have the opportunity to come into the industry and have a career in the industry. And I think it's really important to the future success of the industry that we do that. So yeah, the BPI is very busy on all of those fronts. And there's one final piece of work which we're doing at the moment, which I think I've mentioned publicly before, which is we're looking at gender representation in the industry and seeing if we can better understand why it is that there are fewer female recording artists in the charts, in all award shows, etc., than there are males. We think it's important to understand the drivers of that and look at what we as an industry can do to make sure that more young women want to be recording artists. So there's a lot of work going on around the diversity and inclusion of the talent pipeline. Another really key issue at the BPI that we're working on for the future is environmental sustainability of the industry. Every industry has to be looking at this. It's super complex when you start looking at physical manufacturing, both CD and vinyl, etc., and then obviously all the different activities of record companies. But we're trying to help them do that by helping to create tools they can use to assess their carbon footprint and look at where they can intervene to make change. So MJ Olowry, who is my COO at the BPI, has been leading the work on that and on the gender study for the Brits. So, there's very important work going on both inclusion and on sustainability. And if we want to be a successful industry 50 years into the future, we have to make sure that we do the right things on absolutely vital subjects like those. Our partnership with AIM has, I think, really grown in strength over the last few years. And for the last couple of years, we've invited AIM to attend our board meetings. We work really hand in glove with Paul and the team at AIM. And I'm really grateful to him for the partnership that we've had. We faced a lot of issues together through the streaming inquiry, for example, but also on many issues we work closely together. And I think so many independent labels now are seeing the benefits of being members of AIM and the BPI. I mentioned some of them earlier, but I'm so pleased that we have fantastic labels like Partisan, like Pias, like Dirty Hit, like Good Soldier at the BPI. Many of them also AIM members. And I think there's a really great community of UK indie labels. And I think the trade association should be working hand in hand to help them succeed in their businesses. And that is now what happens. I'm really pleased to see that.
Now, you've said that in 2023, after you leave, you're looking to move, I'm quoting here, into a directly commercial role. Now, that's the kind of phrase that makes me curious. And so is there any chance that you can give us any news on what your next role will be?
Yeah, Gennaro has taught me well not to break embargoes. Right. So absolutely not. Look, 15 years just a sort of CEO of the BPI, and then I had another 10 years before that at the IFPI and the BPI as a lawyer. So it's a long time in trade bodies. And you learn a certain amount by, the great thing about the BPI is you're sitting around the table with Jason Eiley, with Tony Harlow, with, people running these businesses, Jamie Oborn at Dirty Hit, Christian Tattersfield at Good Soldier. You get to talk to some very smart people running very interesting businesses and learn about their business. So having done quite a lot of learning at the BPI, I hope I've got some experience and some contacts that could be useful in a more commercial setting. So yeah, I'm having some conversations now with various people, and I hope to pop up with some news in the next few months, Joe. I'm not going to say more than that. There's no real hurry. I'm at the BPI till January, so yeah. I've still got a day job to do.
Yeah. Well, you've got my email address. You can drop me a line when you've made your mind up. So you're about to embark on this. I hasten to say lap of honour. You've got a reasonable chunk of time left, although it does encompass, I notice, I think the Mercury's and the Brit Awards, so you've got 2 good chances for parties before you leave. So plenty of stuff left for you to do. And one final question, Geoff. This is something that I've been asking everybody recently, which is, let's imagine you leave the BPI and you abscond to a desert island and you could only take one song with you. What would it be?
Oh, man, that's hard. I've been consistent about this throughout my career.
Okay.
The band I most admire is Talk Talk.
Right.
And because I love the journey they went on from sort of synth pop pioneers to the most obscure kind of post-rock jazz, I suppose. So maybe
you can take an album if you want. I know they're a very album.
Well, no, I'm thinking actually let's make it topical, Joe.
Okay.
So I probably pick from Colour of Spring, Give It Up. by Talk Talk, because maybe that's an appropriate thing to say now, but it's also one of my favorite tracks. I remember seeing them in about 85, 86, and they absolutely blew me away. And I think those sort of the experiences you have as a teenager with live music and recorded music sort of stick with you for the rest of your life. So I'm going to stick to my long-term passion for Talk Talk and pick Give It Up.
Okay, very good. And talking of Talk, that's it of us talking. So, Geoff Taylor, thanks very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks very much for the time.
And there we go. So if you found that useful, please share this podcast on with someone else who you think will also get something out of it. And if you'd like to email me and give me your thoughts, it's joe@musically.com. It's joe@musically.com. Don't forget, we have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up a bit of this and a bit of that, of the best analysis, news, marketing, insight, and skills from Music Ally. There's a link below the podcast, so sign up and impress your boss. And don't forget as well, you can check out to see if you are eligible for a free Music Ally subscription. That link is also beneath the podcast. So that's it from me, Joe Sparrow. Until next time, farewell.